My name is Kei Ono. I'm from the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. I'm delighted to welcome you in the first panel session, Thinking Upstream, Product and Material Innovation and Design. So this session will have simultaneous interpretation, so we'll be speaking slowly, but we need to be mindful of timekeeping. We put plastics, which is mostly sourced from oil, petrochemicals, into the economy. And then when we are done with it, we throw it back into the environment. Science shows that an international community has recognized that we need to keep plastics in the economy, in circular economy. For this to happen, among others, the designing of plastic products and the sourcing of feedstock for plastic production needs significant change. Plastics is not just one material. You have literally 10,000 chemicals in plastics, and some of which have growing concerns, either because of their inherent hazards or because they impede the recycling at the end of life. So let's hear from our distinguished panel how we can innovate upstream in the plastics life cycle to reduce chemicals of concern, pollution, and waste. So today we have Ms. Winnie Lowe. She's the project director of the Prevention Ocean Plastics program at the Pew Charitable Trust. Pew works with governments, industry, scientists, and other non-governmental organizations to better understand the global problem of plastic pollution and to find solutions. And we also have three other panelists who are connected online. First, Mr. Jim Seward. He's Senior Vice President of Technology, R&D, and Sustainability at Lyondell Basel, one of the world's largest polymer manufacturers. Lyondell Basel initiated strategic investments to integrating recycling and bio-based technologies into their petrochemical business, effectively paving the way to decoupling their plastic production from dependence on fossil feedstock. Then we have Dr. Chayun Wan, who was in ETH Zurich. He recently joined the Technology and Society Laboratory at the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology, EMPA. His research focuses on understanding the life cycles and risks of chemicals in the Anthropocene and nature environment, with a particular interest in circular economy and science policy interface and chemicals and waste. The last panel, we have Mr. Archawat Om Charionslip, the executive chairman at ETRAN. He has a long career working in environmental sustainability policy and innovation for both Coca-Cola and PepsiCo in Asia Pacific. As an investor, his focus is on supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs and supporting new technologies and disruptive business models to help build sustainable business ecosystems. So thank you for joining this session as panel. And so first I would like to ask Winnie an overall connection to what the science is telling us based on the work that Pew Charitable Trust has been spreading. Could you please tell us what can we do to reduce unnecessary new plastics going into the economy? Why do we need to redesign the entire plastic system from upstream? In about 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Kay. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here to be sharing with you some of the findings from the report, Breaking the Plastic Wave, that we did with Systemic and other partners. So as you heard earlier in the context setting session, there is no silver bullet to solving the plastic pollution problem. And it will take a system change because it is a system-wide problem. Focusing solutions on any single part of the plastic system will quickly meet with technical, economic, environmental, and social limits. And to put us on the path to ending plastic pollution, it will require that we put in place urgently all the known technologies and policies at some of the fastest rates in history. Solutions both upstream and downstream in the plastic system are needed, and are distributed roughly 50-50 between upstream and downstream. However, it is critically important to start by focusing on the upstream portion of the plastic system, as many downstream solutions will flow from how much and what plastics will be produced to begin with. So I want to start by highlighting 3 key reasons why. One is that about half of the global plastic waste today is mismanaged, and going forward, plastic waste generation is expected to outpace our capacity to manage it. Over the next 20 years, we estimated that capital investments in virgin plastic production and plastic conversion will outpace investment in waste management infrastructure by 10 to 1. The second reason is that just over 20% of plastics produced today are recyclable, given the economics of the waste management and recycling industry. And the third, under a business as usual trajectory, by 2040, the greenhouse gas emissions throughout the plastic life cycle are estimated to take up 20% of the allowable carbon budget agreed under the Paris Agreement. And about 80% of that is from virgin plastic production and conversion. As you can see, there are some substantial headwinds. We can begin to address these 3 issues by redesigning the entire plastic system, starting with upstream processes, looking across 4 areas. First, we could start by evaluating the need for the material itself and eliminating the avoidable plastics so that this waste would not be generated to begin with. Second, we could redesign plastic products for reuse and refill to replace single-use items. Third, we want to evaluate the choice of the material itself. Could alternative materials be suitable for the intended use and in the markets where the products are sold? And then lastly, for the products that are produced and used, we need to connect the dots between the upstream and downstream processes to ensure that the plastic products that are put on the market can be and will be recycled, both economically and in the places where they are sold. With these 4 steps, it is feasible to reduce plastic production and consumption by nearly 50% by 2040, without compromising the services and performance that businesses and consumers have come to enjoy from plastics. And achieving these outcomes will require substantial changes by businesses producing and using the plastics and their substitutes. It will also require governments to create significant incentives for more sustainable business models and remove the cost advantage of virgin plastic feedstock over recycled materials. Upstream solutions under a system change approach present many opportunities for businesses to innovate new business models and new materials. And working in partnership, businesses, communities, and governments can transition society to a low plastic waste, circular economy of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie, for highlighting why it is important that we start from the beginning and redesign. Not just we do less, but we do better. And it's reassuring that there may be ways to do so. So now I would like to turn to Jim. And I asked if Jim could turn on his camera. I heard that LyondellBasell is integrating its operations to tie in the cradle and grave of plastics. Could you please share with us your experiences at scale with the polymer company? What is your vision to reduce new plastics going into the economy in the first place?
So, thank you very much. Let's get going. So, thank you for your introduction, Kate. I was really interested with the words that have been said already in the scene setting. And some of the things that Julia and Steve were saying, I must say, I think were resonating with some of the ways that we think and some of the things that hopefully we can cover over this next 45 minutes or so. You know, I think that we seem to be at a point where there is a very common view in terms of system change is needed, and system change is not trivial, right? This is not tinkering around the edges. System change is something that needs to do exactly what it says and address many different aspects of this plastic waste challenge. I think the point that maybe we'll get into in this session of around technology and innovation being very important, because in the word change, it obviously implies that we have to do things differently than we did in the past. And innovation is a key pathway to that. The reason actually my role combines for our company innovation and sustainability is exactly the recognition of that point. I think technology is evolving, and I think technology usually does, and will have to in this case evolve at an exponential pace in order to meet the challenges that were commented on. And I also think this idea around different solutions for different geographies is a very important concept that we have to really think through, what works at scale, but also what works in different local environments as well. And we need to be able to manage both those things. Waste is both an intensely local activity and is also a global challenge. So how do we think about that? I apologize for not being there in person. I simply have not managed to get to Dakar and Stockholm in the right timing to be in Stockholm next week. But I apologize for that. But I appreciate very much the invitation. When we think about plastics, about 70% of plastics are what we would call sort of durable, longer life. Things like transportation, energy, electricity, building, construction, those sorts of things. And around 30%, depending on your definition of the word plastic, is more around shorter life, if often useful things, but things that quite often end up as waste in their predominance, right? So things like packaging, medical equipment, things like that. And when we really think through, and I think you have to do this, to think through the individual products and applicational areas in the plastic market, there are some things which are today clearly barriers to our ability to drive an accelerated plastic circular economy. And make no mistake, we are talking about the need for very, very strong acceleration, as we have seen. Kind of linearity of the path we're on is not enough. And so things like design we've talked about, and design complexity is terribly important. We've tended to design in the past for functionality and sometimes for appearance marketing, and we need to really think fundamentally about the design question. Equally important, collection systems being very important. There's kind of a difference here between volume and weight, and that is often at the heart of complexity around collection systems, and at the heart of what actually drives value. And this notion that was touched on earlier in terms of how can we drive systems which are economically sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable, in terms of as we try to make this system more circular. There's no doubt to address the redesign, the reduce, the reuse as key parts of the solution. But I have a firm belief that that's simply not sufficient. The real heavy lift at the heart of this matter is we've got to create a circular economy. And if we don't do that, we're a little bit playing around the edges, to be honest. So that is the fundament for me, and maybe thinking about this of where industry sort of plays in all of these different fields. If we don't give sufficient attention to that, I think that is we won't achieve what we want. As I said, acceleration is important. System change is important. Technology must be exponential in the way we move forward, and system change must involve value and participation of all stakeholders. And we've heard that a bit earlier as well. And that again is a change in the way we've done things before, in terms of thinking about how private and public links up, thinking about how formal and informal links up. It has to be a system change that evolves, that involves a range of stakeholders. So thinking about innovation, meaningful innovation, and I would sort of think innovation and investment are kind of linked a little bit here. So I want to talk about those two things. So if we think about innovation and investment in recycling and circularity, the really good news is that the demand pull is there today. We don't have to create the demand for this, right? We've already created enough progress, I believe, that the demand pool is there. This has to accelerate significantly, of course. But today, the key barrier to acceleration in recycling rates is not the demand pull; it's the supply side. There's no doubt about that. It's the infrastructure is being an important bottleneck. I think consumer behavior is important, and thinking about how again you incentivize that in part through education, but probably in part through economic model again is important in order to make sure that we are incentivizing the right behaviors, incentivizing the right system change, also economically. While the financing and business models, I think, associated with the development of recycling are developing, and we see that. I believe they're developing at an exponential rate, albeit with some important challenges to address. And there's no doubt there are still some important challenges to address. It's a much more complex side on the waste collection and the waste collection and management side, and obviously the two go hand in hand, and you have different solution paths, as we've said, according to geography. We're learning from organisations such as the Alliance to End Plastic Waste in terms of that this requires different ways of thinking. It requires different mixes of funding and financing, including perhaps grant and longer term. I'm much less worried about the financing of innovation because what I see already is that there are business cases for that to get done. I'm much more worried about the longer term financing associated with infrastructure, for example, where schemes such as EPR can play an important role. But we also need to think about public and private, formal and informal, in terms of how that gets done. And finally, we would support a global agreement. I think that's an important part of the solution set as a way of accelerating these measures. But I think within that, national action plans will be important. They've been mentioned earlier, and tailored solution paths. And finally, potentially, development of clear market signalling is needed to unlock investment. I don't know, Kay, if you heard all of that, or whether I cut off halfway through.
What?
I'm going to pause.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. My voice is heard with echo. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for mentioning about the systemic change, which resonates a lot with what Winnie was saying earlier. Now I would like to move on to Jayun. I hope that he is connected. Jayun?
Yes, can you hear? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, so you have experience in working with the Stockholm Conventions on POPs and also in the research area. So could you please tell us about your views on the need to understand and influence the selection of chemicals used in plastic manufacturing as part of product design? Why do we need to better identify and address chemicals of concern in plastics?
Yeah, many thanks, Kay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Many thanks also to the organizers for the opportunity to share some of our lessons learned on the chemicals in plastics. Chemical additives are an integral part of plastics, providing many desired performance, such as durability and flame retardancy. Our recent study, as Kay just previously said, suggests that there are over 10,000 chemicals that have been intentionally used in plastic production, and many of them do have concerning hazardous properties, such as carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, etc. From our lessons learned, we need to properly address these chemicals of concern due to the following three reasons. First, they can cause direct health impacts. Many of these chemicals are not bound to plastic polymers. In other words, they may be released during the production, use, recycling, and disposal of plastics, causing exposure and health impacts. Numerous studies have shown that such exposure takes place in virtually every part of our planet, from indoor environments to workers and communities near recycling and disposal sites in the global south, to even remote regions such as the Arctic and the Mariana Trench, the deepest place of our ocean. Second, not only can they cause significant health impacts, The presence of many chemicals of concern can also pose technical challenges to our current plastic management measures, such as mechanical and chemical recycling. For example, by reducing the compatibility of the different plastic streams. This will impact the societal transition to a safe and sustainable circular economy. Third, currently, we do not have a good overview of which chemicals are used in which plastic products. Essentially, we have very limited control of chemicals that we're exposing ourselves, the environment, and our technical system to via plastics. Therefore, we need to better identify and address chemicals of concern in plastics. Good news is that over the past decades, we have accumulated a lot of really good knowledge and tools for the plastic and product design. It is really a good time, like with the plastic treaty negotiations, for our society as a whole to reflect on some of the lessons learned and do better design. I want to highlight two aspects here. First, we need to seriously ask ourselves why we need plastic at the first place. Particularly, we need to ask the questions which performance set we would like to have and whether it is essential. I always like to give the example of PET bottles. Back then, the beverage producers, plastic manufacturers, and the recyclers could come together and agree on a minimalistic list of additives to be used. This has not only greatly reduced the amounts of chemicals of concern, but also greatly increased the recyclability of PET bottles. So this example tells us exactly that we can do more with less. Second, in addition to performance, which have been always the focus of the product design, we really need to think upfront about how we want to deal with products after use. In other words, we need to design the whole life cycle, as previously speakers also mentioned. This is not only in terms of the technology sense, but also in terms of the social economic systems around it. For example, we really need to ask the question about who will do it with what incentives, and what are the potential social, economic, and political barriers. We have already a lot of good examples of extended producer responsibilities that have created suitable technical, social, and economic systems. So we have established many good practices here and there to do more with less and to consider the whole life cycle, including chemicals therein. Now it is time to learn from such good practices and scale them up. This would require the whole value chains, and including the consumers, the whole society to truly work together with adequate information transparency. I'm confident that the negotiation of the plastic treaty and the treaty itself can be the much needed platform for the society to work together and solve the issues throughout it's like the life cycle of plastics, including chemicals therein. Before finishing my intervention, I would also like to share that in addition to the Spotlight report on plastics, UDEM is also preparing a report on chemicals in plastics, which will give a comprehensive overview on the topic, also touching upon many of the points that I raised before. Very much looking forward to discussing further with my fellow panelists and you, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tayun, for sharing your thoughts. Flame retardants, many of which are persistent organic pollutants. One way is to find safer flame retardants. Another way is to change the design so that you don't have to use flame retardants to begin with. So it's very encouraging to hear that we can do more with less. Right, now I would like to turn to Om. As an investor, an experienced business sustainability expert, can we hear your perspective on the changes and investment needed in product and system design so that we can continue delivering the same or better functionality, using less material and using it in a way that keeps it in the economy at its highest value. Om, are you able to open the microphone?
Um, I am. I have. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, cool. All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are. My name is Om. I am an angel investor and also startup founder based in Bangkok. I wasn't born with a lot of money to be an angel investor, just like everybody in this room. On this call, I work hard like everybody else. In the last 20 years, I have a privilege of working with the company like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, where I get exposures in the learnings, working with the industries on how the industry is approaching plastic pollution. What I notice is that there has been a lot of effort, resources, given into or recycling, right? But what I don't see as much is effort and resource and investment that's going to reduce and reuse. I believe that we talk about systematic change. Reduce, reuse, recycle should all happen at the same times. One or the others will not work well. If we just overspending or over investing in recyclings, it's almost like we are treating the symptom of plastic pollution, but not the illness itself, right? The illness here, I'm talking about here is, as consumers, our illness is our addiction to convenience, right? We love to consume anytime, anywhere that we go. We love to have this habit of disposable. We dispose our waste and then make it, somebody else's problem. We seem to be enticed, to this. I call it a Christmas present effect, where everything should be brought to us brand new, pristine and fresh. I think a lot of these kind of habits or attitudes is actually adding up into folks not paying enough attention on refillable or reuse solutions. But I think that is about to change. I'm also an avid, students of climate change, and with our 1.5 degrees ambition by 2050, as we approach 2030, I think we realize that we still have a long way to go, and we running a risk of not being able to meet that 2050 ambition. That's not only climate change, but also in terms of plastic pollutions, right? What I anticipate will happen is that the current regulatory pressure that the private sector is feeling right now will get amplified and direct toward consumers directly. Otherwise, we won't be able to move quickly enough. Right. On one hand, it doesn't sound so good that consumer will be directly restrict or regulated, but at the same time, it represents a huge opportunities because consumer will then start demanding for better solution for plastic waste. I believe that this represents significant both economics and social opportunities, for reuse models, from upstream to reuse models, as much if not more than the recycling itself. Um, on the innovative business model that can be brought about. I think before you get into the innovative business model, I think every companies now have purpose, right? They're not just here to sell product and make profit anymore. Everyone understand the impact on social and environment. So start there. Once you have the purpose, then that purpose will guide you toward your innovative business model. For example, one of the company that I serve as a chairman on is an electric motorcycle company, right? Our purpose is to drive the better world. We want to offer a clean, efficient, and equitable world, right? And with that guiding us on how we come up with our product. Clean meaning that how can we make sure that energy source that we use is clean, as we understand that battery is not the purest, cleanest source of energies. When you extract such materials, there are some negative consequences, but we try our best to stay within the current technologies. On the efficiencies, right? We're looking at our product and its afterlife. What happened to our batteries afterward? What happened to the materials that we use? Are we using bioplastic or biodegradable plastic? We are experimenting with all these technologies. And on equitable, with new technologies, if you guys remember 10, 15 years ago when iPhone first came out, and you remember how expensive it is, new technology usually come with huge price tags, and lay person may not be able to afford, right? So we came up with a business model that we want to make sure that our technology is being offered to the world and everybody can afford it, because otherwise we defeat the purpose. The rich people will buy our product and keep it in the garage as a toy. But we want people to be able to use our product on the street as much as we can. That's why we come up with a business model of rental. $4 an hour, more or less. You now can allow technology to be accessible by everybody, including people with the lowest income. But that business model is very, very difficult, to run, because it requires a lot of financial support. But it can be done. Imagine if it's not motorcycle. I'm sorry, I'm spending a bit of time, but something that's closer to your house. For example, containers or packaging for food and beverage, right? Imagine if we can come up with a reuse business model that can actually provide consumer with better pricing, better product, right, and better profit, for the company as well, while maintaining a strong relationship with consumers and able to access a very valuable data, consumer data. Usually food and beverage or consumer company do not have access to, because they distribute their products through third parties, wholesalers and retailers, so on and so forth. Can we build a reuse models that can do all 5 things? The answer is yes, right? Imagine if you can have a smart cup, right? This smart cup is owned by consumers through subscription. What's going to happen there is right away, business no longer have to carry the cost of packaging, right? And if it's subscription, it's going to be better profit forecast as well, because money is paid up front, every month, every whatever the subscription term is. And in terms of product, the packaging itself, have ability to regulate the temperature. For example, your favorite beverage can be served in the perfect temperature at all time, right? With this cup or smart cup, and also subscription models, it's allow you to build a stronger relationship with your consumer as well, especially with data, right? Every time somebody subscribe or fill that cup, you have abilities to scan, QR code, whatever it may be. And you will know who purchasing it, what product is being purchased, where is it being purchased, and how much is being purchased. These data are something that the producer of fast-moving consumer product are really, really value, and they don't necessarily have at their fingertip for availability. So, it is possible for you to come up with innovative, business model that can actually good for everybody. I think from the investment's perspective, these technologies are not brand new. It's just a combination of existing technology. However, in order to run with this business model, I believe that, company need to be a little bit more courageous, right? Lack of the confidence in new technology, new business model can be made up by, courage and knowledge that the company has, and the resources the company has, right? So this way, you can put, a better solutions, better designs, and better business model that can solve the plastic solution problem, at least partially, if you think of it as a system change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Om, for sharing the perspective from investor and also from business expert, and giving some concrete examples. Right, so we've heard from panelists remotely and on site. I would like to now open the floor for some 1 or 2 questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Or if you are attending online, please write your questions on the chat message. So I see hand from the gentleman over there. Would it be possible to pass microphone? You already have. Please go ahead.
Yes, it already got to me. Thank you very much. I'm Brogio Mizarocchi from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Thank you very much for all the speakers and all the interventions. I don't know if mine is more of a question or more of a reflection, But I'm listening to the intervention. I think it's clear from the breaking the plastic wave and the system change scenario that there is something to do with the lack of speed in the waste management infrastructure and the fact that investment in production of virgin plastic is going farther than that. But when we look at upstream, so what is really upstream? Is it clear what is upstream? When we look at the system change, shouldn't we look at many different things? We always make the example of reusing packaging. That's the example when we talk about reuse. But what does it mean for plastic in general? Can we look at, like, for example, just among other things, shifting from a product ownership economy to a service-based economy? So my question for the panelists is, like, now that we have this opportunity of the multilateral agreement, what can we do and how can we do to better understand upstream innovation and at the same time harness the full potential of upstream innovation that goes well beyond what we normally considered as upstream innovation? Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks for this question. Maybe I also look into if there are a second question while letting panelists think about the answer. Do we have another hand? I think I see lady over there asking for the floor. Thanks for passing microphone. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity and welcome. And production of alternatives for plastics. From the industry sector, I think we are waiting for that, because how to replace plastic, sometimes we need alternatives, environmental friendly, maybe affordable alternatives. That aspect also I think we need to look into from the industrial sector, from the business perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question regarding the investment on alternatives. Right. So who would like to take those questions? One from Ellen MacArthur Foundation regarding upstream. Would you like to try, Winnie, or not sure if Jim was able to hear that question?
Yeah, I was. So I can say a couple of words on that. If hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. So if I understood the first question, it was looking at innovations that are required upstream, and how can we move that? And the second question, I think, was to do with substitutes. I think this idea of trying to connect the business model innovation, which says that we are linking the upstream to the downstream. I just want to expand on that, because I think that's a very, very important concept. And there's a very relevant comment in the chat for those of you that can see it, the most recent one. So we are coming from a place where the upstream and the downstream are totally disconnected. So what I mean by that is we're coming from a place where the supply chain, the production of plastics into the plastic item that you and me might consume is totally disconnected from the downstream historically, right? And that is something that has to be fixed as a matter of priority. And I can say how I think that will be fixed, because if you have that disconnection, it's incredibly difficult to design across the chain products which are being made in a way which then can be recycled or reused in order to become circular again. And historically, those have been two different worlds. And if I compare and contrast that to the steel industry, for example, they've been the same world, right? They've been the same companies, the same processes. So with us, what I think is inevitable, and what we're already starting to see now, and my company is already kind of involved in this, is cooperations which may even end up in some kind of equity participations. I mean, really trying to join the different parts of that value chain together. And so, I mean, as a company like us, or as a company like the big FMCG companies, Coca-Cola, Unilever, whoever you want, if we don't understand what makes effective recycling, what is the product design that leads to effective recycling, this will always be broken. So I think the connection of that chain is one of the absolutely fundamental things that has to happen. I start to see that being happen, which is very encouraging. As I said, with explicit partnerships, with equity positions, with all sorts of things. But that is an absolutely fundamental part when we talk about how should we think about the upstream. We cannot pretend as the upstream that we already know the answers to that. We have to be able to work in a much more integrated way with the downstream in order to be able to do that. And then just to the second point, I mean, I think the substitute argument is a really good, really important part of this debate, right? And I think that the market has a very important role to play here. As I've said earlier, we need to be making sure that we're not doing stupid things from a legislation incentivization point of view. But please, when we think about substitutes, we've got to think about, as Achawat said, we've got to think about not just the waste dimension. That's very important. But we've also got to think about the greenhouse gas dimension. We've also got to think about, the sort of human safety dimension as well. So don't make, kind of unintended mistakes by just focusing on one. We've got to be able to take a holistic view of that debate. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Winnie, please.
To answer the question from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I think to think about innovation, we need to stop thinking about one for one. So we don't want to say we have one item and we have to replace it with another item. You can think of it from a societal system perspective. So what is it that we actually want to achieve? What is the service? What is the performance that we're trying to deliver? So, for example, one of the microplastics sources is tire dust particles. We can think about innovating better tires that release less particles, or we can also think about how do we structure our society, our cities, so that you need less driving, and therefore you have less microplastics generated. And it's thinking in these bigger ways, not just the one item for another, that will allow us to come up with even bigger and better innovation.
Yes, I see Jayun's hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think these are really important.
Mike is on.
Yeah. Okay,
Try.
can you hear me? Yeah, can you
I
hear me
think
now?
it's the problem. We're not hearing you in the room.
Okay, now? Is it okay now?
Taraksha, microphone needs to be on there. Go ahead,
Yes.
Jayun.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, perfect. I think this is also very much related to like another discussion that is happening under the UNIA about the science policy interface. I think this is really about, I think the innovation is also about to really bring the people together from the different disciplines. Also that we need material scientists, we need chemists, we need environment scientists, we need designers, architects, we need all the people, all the disciplines to work together, to think big, as Winnie just said, and also to work jointly towards the same direction. I think sometimes we have developed the science in a way it's more fragmented, more siloed, and I really hope that also with the plastic treaty negotiations, with the negotiations on the science policy interface, we can also bring the different disciplines together to think big and think the right solution. Yeah, thank you.
Our panelists for responding to those questions. Thank you very much. Right, so having heard those panels, discussion, and the dialogue, we could we could highlight that the resolution to end plastic pollution it did have the elements. You mentioned the need to protect human health and the environment, and also to promote circular economies for plastics. So I would like to mention some of the key messages that you could take away from this session. First, in a new plastic economy, the way in which plastic products were designed, and the way in which feedstock to produce plastics in the first place is sourced, this will need to change significantly. We have been discussed the need of deepening our conversation on plastic additives. We also need to innovate upstream in the plastic life cycle to reduce chemicals of concern, pollution, and waste. We have heard 4 steps to reduce by 80% of plastic pollution by 2040, and those are evaluate the need for material itself and eliminate avoidable plastics. Redesign for reuse and replace single-use items. Reevaluate the choice to the material itself and explore opportunities for alternative materials. For the products produced and used, we need to connect the up and downstream to ensure that they will be recycled. And finally, we need adequate sustained investment and incentives upstream in the plastics system to improve the design of materials and products to support circular economy objectives of higher reuse and recycling. I hope those key takeaway messages were useful for this session, and I'd like to close this dialogue for the moment. And I believe that there will be the second panel to come.